Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today I'm going to show you a quick and easy Stashbuster quilt. Try and say that 3 times fast. In fact, it was so quick and easy that I got sidetracked and made a whole other quilt top. So I'll come back to that at the end of the video if you want to see that one. But let's get to the one that I set out to make. So basically, I've got too much fabric. If you're a quilter, you probably have too much fabric. So I just wanted to make something super quick over the summer that would use up a bit of it and clear up my clutter. So what we're going to make is a Stashbuster that's 1 block repeated. It's a quarter log cabin block, but it's not this one. This one is from my Big Blocks Quilt Along, which was like last month or the month before, can't even remember when. And it's got a few more strips. What we're going to do is a smaller version that's even more beginner friendly and easy and quick. And there's still lots of ways you could lay it out, but you're just going to whip through them, basically. It takes charm pack squares, jelly roll strips, and fat quarters. So, and there's really very little cutting that you have to do, especially if you do it my way. But there's 2 ways. Always more than one way you can do things. So anyway, I'll get into all the instructions, and then if you want to stick around at the end, you can see the whole other quilt top that I made for no reason. Here I am on my floor with my big cutting mat, as per usual. I've got 3 piles of stuff, which was what we're going to use. 2 of them I'm not going to cut at all, and 1 of them I do have to cut, so I'll talk you through it. Okay, so that was a slight lie. I will eventually be cutting the jelly roll strips, but because I'm going to chain piece along them, I don't have to cut them at this point. If you want to, these are the measurements, and they're also in the blog post on my website. But basically, that's the 2 ways you can do it. You either cut these particular measurements out first, or follow along with the way I did it. The keen quilt mathematicians among you will see that this will make a 13-inch block. So if you are confident in your 1/4-inch seam and that everything is going to go together perfectly, you can make a quilt that is 76.5 by 76.5 with 36 of these blocks. I also used 36 blocks, but I trimmed mine down to 12.5 because there were a few of them that weren't quite at that 13 inches. So you can choose what you want to do. My quilt came out at 72 inches by 72 inches. So pick your poison. And then you can either just do them as standalone blocks or combine them into 4, depending on the layout you like. I'll come back to that. But to make the quarter log cabin blocks, this is the fabric that I pulled. It's different kind of colors to what I normally use, which I guess is why it's a Stashbuster, because I don't pull these ones. So I've got some charm pack squares. I've got a mix of, I'm basically going with 3 colors, 3-ish colors. So blue, gray, and this is like a mix of orange, rust, ochre, some random, I had a lot of these weird colored Allison Glass charm pack squares, which I honestly don't remember buying, but obviously I did. So, and then a few blue thrown in as well. But anyway, so charm pack square, if you don't know it, is 5 inch by 5 inch. So if in your stash you have some of these, you don't need to cut this bit, you just pull them out. Next bit, so let's start with one of these. Next bit is jelly roll strips, so 2.5 inch wide. And we need 1 that's the same length as the charm pack block, so 5 inches. And then we'll need another one that's 7 inches long. I am not going to pre-cut my jelly roll strips because I usually would give myself an extra 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch anyway, just in case something went, I don't know, in case I lined something up wrong in the sewing. I usually just like to leave it a bit longer and trim it rather than being cut short. It must have been something that happened in the first year that I was quilting, because I'm always like, I'm not gonna cut it to exactly the right length. But if you want to, it's 5 inch, 7 inch. So I'm using a few different shades of gray, basically, just all the gray I had. I could just use this probably, one, because I've got loads of this, but I want to kind of mix it up and have a slight variety in the grays to just give some more interest in the quilt. It is going to look scrappy, even though I'm not going with that many colors. If you want to go with more colors, I would suggest having something the same. So whether it's the charm pack squares or the jelly roll strips or this, and when I say the same, I don't mean the same exact fabric. I mean the same family of colors. So like these are not the same fabric. They're not even the same shade of gray, but they're all gray. Do you know what I mean? And so I'm hoping that's going to pull it together. Anyhow, okay, so we had our jelly roll strips, 1, and let's just put some other one there, 2, pretend they're the right length. And then I've got these. So again, this is a mix of aqua and light blue, baby blues and aqua blues. And I don't know if I'm going to use this one or not. But anyway, some of them have prints. Some of them are just tone on tone. They're mostly not a lot of print going on. And that's probably just a case of the way I tend to buy fabric. So you use your own judgment, your own eye as to how much the patterns are going to work for this for you. If you're using heavily patterned fabric, then I would say maybe the jelly roll strips could be a solid or a tone on tone. And so then at least you've got some, breaking up the pattern. So if this bit, so this is going to go here, where is it? If this is going to go here and here, then if you can imagine if this, so this is a kind of a pattern. If this was also a pattern, then maybe if these were a little bit more toned down, that would help to break it up and not look super, super busy. But you'll know what looks nice to your eye, okay? So anyway, so this is the outside. Again, just imagine the length is cut. And this round is 6.5 inch wide. This one will be 7 inch. And this one is a random 13 inches because our quarter log block is going to be 13 inches. And that is because I'm using a long 6.5 by whatever, the length doesn't matter, but this one's 6.5 by 24.5 inch ruler. And I didn't want to have to be, so this outer round could be 6 inches wide. It wouldn't affect very much. I wanted to be able to cut my strips with this ruler because I don't have a 6.5 inch AccuQuilt strip die, which is what I usually use to cut strips. So second best is my ruler. And so I just didn't want to be having to fiddling around going, where's the line? I just wanted to use a ruler, right? So where was I? Right. So anyway, so I'm not cutting Charmpax squares. I'm not cutting jelly roll strips. I am cutting these. If you've watched my videos about how I store my fabric and roll it up and all of that, I don't generally keep track of what size everything is. However, for this, I do know a lot of you guys have a lot of fat quarters. So I wanted to show you how you can cut the strips that we need from a fat quarter. So this is one, and so I've got it facing me, so facing me portrait style. You're probably seeing it landscape anyway. And from this, you can get 3 6.5 inch strips that are going to be the long length of your fat quarter, which for mine is, I looked at this earlier, let's see, for mine is 22 including the selvage, so it's a little over 21 without it, and so we need 1 13 inch and 1 7 inch strip from that. So the fat quarter should be able to get you 3 13 inch and 3 7 inch, right? So you cut 3 long strips, and then you either leave it uncut and trim it after, but you'll still, either way, whether you cut it before or after, you will have a 13 inch, 13 inch, 13 inch, 7 inch, 7 inch, 7 inch, and a little bit of leftover, okay? But not too much. So hopefully that makes sense. You can obviously cut it from bigger yardage as well. Some of the stuff I have here is larger than a fat quarter, but I wanted to make it easy if you're trying to use up fat quarters. So hopefully that'll work. In theory, if you're gonna sew the way I'm gonna sew it, it would be, you don't cut this, you don't cut that, and you've got 3 cuts. What, no, two cuts. 1, 2, and then you've got 3 strips. And then it's just, you trim it after to get the second piece. Or you can cut it all ahead of time. You do you. Anyway, if that was too confusing, or you need it written down, because I know I go back and forth, I do have the whole thing written down on my blog, which you can go and look at for free. Right, so what I'm gonna do now, again, I'm not sure about this because of the dark blue. I don't know if I want this in it. I just want these, but I'll decide on that. But I'm definitely gonna cut these. Anyway, enough talking. I'm gonna cut all this up into my strips, and then we'll get making the blocks.
So as I said before, I designed this quilt specifically with pre-cuts in mind to try and cut down on the amount of cutting you'd have to do, because I don't like cutting. I assume other people don't, but I could be wrong there. However, I don't have a lot of fat quarters in my stash. I have randomly sized bits that I've taken chunks out of, as you can see from the video. Anyway, if you do have fat quarters, you shouldn't have a lot of waste from your 6.5-inch strips. I just cut as many as I could from the yardage that I had in its strange shapes and sizes. If you want to know exactly how many strips you need, jelly roll strips, and these 6.5-inch wide, more yardage strips, if you look at the link in the description, you can go to the blog post. It's got all of that for the the large throw size quilt that I made. But anyway, all the cutting requirements, fabric requirements are written up on the blog post for you to see there.
Okay, so here I am at my sewing machine. I've got my charm pack squares here, jelly roll strips here, and then the longer strips which are cut here, which I didn't cut into the 13 and 7. They're just long for now. And then where you can't see it over there, I've got my ironing mat and my iron, or pressing mat and my iron, so that when I get to the point where I want to press, I can just scooch you along with my rolling chair and do that. But I'm going to put the long strips out of the way for now, because what I'm going to start with is chain piecing the charm plaque squares to the jelly roll strips. So again, I'm not cutting these either. So for the long ones, if there's space for like more than one, hopefully you can see that. The space for, I'll put it over here. If there's more than one space for more than one charm pack along it, I can just chain sew along, and then I'll trim them later. So I'll sort of chain sew, pause, trim, press, repeat. That's what we're doing. Doesn't really matter which way you do this, but I'm going to start with the jelly roll strip facing up at me, and then I can place the charm pack squares on it as I sew, and then I'll be able to see, you know, if I have enough. This one obviously is not long enough to add another one, so then I got to switch and do another jelly roll strip. And I've just got, there's black thread in the machine already. It's probably not perfect for this, but I don't want to take the time to rethread, so I'm going to use the black until the black bobbin runs out, and then I might go for a gray thread, I think, for this. But yeah, I'm not being a perfectionist about that. So I will just sew, probably fast forward some of that, see how quickly we can do this.
So if you are brand new to quilting, what I'm doing is putting the charm pack square, which is the 5 by 5 inch square, right sides to right sides is how we say it, but or pretty side to pretty side, you might hear some people saying, and then sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm using the edge of my presser foot to find out where that 1/4 inch seam is. And then I'm not breaking threads, like I'm not pressing the cut thread button. In between each square, I just keep sewing, and then I will trim them apart after. So it's a pretty common chain piecing method that you'll probably see in lots of people's videos and tutorials if you haven't already. And even if you did cut your jelly roll strips to the exact size, you can still sew like this in a chain. Anyways, after that's done, I'm cutting it all apart. So you're either snipping the threads in between your units or cutting them and the jelly roll strip like I'm doing. And then I give them all a good press. And then it's a case of trimming again. So when I'm saying that I'm not cutting at the beginning and somehow that's easier for me, it might not feel easier for you. You might prefer it if this strip was exactly the length you need. For me, somehow this makes it feel easier. So all I'm doing now is trimming one side of that unit so that that's the straight edge, and that's the one I'm going to add the second jelly roll strip to. And it's at this point where we start to just repeat ourselves. So I'm now putting that unit right side down on top of the second jelly roll strip. So if you had cut them to the exact size, it would be those 7-inch strips, or just one long strip that you're chain piecing along either way. So you should be crossing the seam that you already made. It doesn't matter which side, because, you know, we'll turn it around. but you should be making basically an L shape either way with your strips, and that's it. Just keep going until you're done with that. And then we repeat, and we press and we trim, and then we're going to move on to the larger strips. So you should now have a pile of 36 of these units, and then we just do the same again with those big 6.5-inch strips. So you're going to start with the short one, crossing the seam you just made last time. So you should be crossing the seam where the two jelly roll strips meet, if that makes sense. With the short, if you've cut them all to size, with the shorter of your large 6.5 inch strips, so the 6.5 by 7 inch, or just chain piece like I'm doing, and then you can trim that afterwards. Either way. So after you've pressed and trimmed again, just like we did before, you should have a unit that looks like this. And then we're on the final home stretch, and we are adding the last 6.5 inch strip. So on the side where you would be crossing the seam that now has the 6.5 inch strip and the jelly roll strip, that's where you want to sew your longer 6.5 inch by 13 inch strip. And you can just go ahead and chain piece away like we did all the other times. It's just repeating the same thing we did before. And once you've pressed, it's a case of taking all of those blocks to the cutting mat to trim them down. So as I said, if you're a super precise sewer, you can trim these down to 13 inches. I could have done that for most of them, but there were 5 or 6 that were just a little smidgen too small, and I can try and stretch it and sew it anyway. But for me, it was just easier to decide they were all going to be 12.5 inches. And I've got I have a 12.5 inch square ruler, and lots of quilters do, not most people. Anyway, because I had this ruler, it made it easier anyway, which made the decision easier. So yeah, I ended up with a slightly smaller quilt, but I'm okay with that. So you choose what size you want it to be, get them all trimmed, and then we're talking layout. So I don't have a great big design wall, so I put them out on my living room floor, and I tested out a few layouts. This is the first one where they're just basically the squares are all going the same way. And then I turned them around and was like trying to make squares in the middle where the charm pack squares would all meet each other, which was kind of cute. But then I had to move the top row to the bottom to make the square. Anyway, that's what's happening. So I'll put up a photo in a minute. And honestly, I spent too long on this stage of choosing the layout. So that's one with the squares. And then I tried like a random one where like one square was facing up and the other one was facing down, and that one just looked a bit messy. I don't know. And then I fiddled around with another layout after that, which I probably didn't need to. Anyways, upshot of it is I decided that the easiest thing to do was to use the first layout, where it's basically just a case of the charm pack square needs to be facing all in one direction. So it looks more repetitive, it's more beginner friendly, and there's no seams to match up. So then all I did was start making pairs of the blocks. So again, just laying them out, trying not to repeat the same fabric next to each other if I could, but sometimes it happened. So we're aiming for 6 rows of 6 blocks. So if you're making the same size I did. So once you've got all your pairs sewn together, set aside 6 pairs of those, and then don't sew those yet, and add the other ones to each other so that you have 6 rows of 4, and then you can go ahead and add the last 2 to those rows, if that makes sense. I then pressed all my rows, and because I was having a good chat with my sister on the phone, if you see me gesticulating in the fast forward, I didn't fancy getting up, basically, and laying all the rows down on the floor to see what they would look like next to each other. So I did this. I pushed along the table just to make sure nothing looked like too repetitive next to each other, and just sewed rows to rows. And I kept doing that the whole time. So what it ended up with was there was a little bit of matching blues in the center of the quilt when I had no choice but to repeat something, but that's fine. Anyway, the only thing you need to pay attention to when you're sewing the rows together is where the corner of each block meets each other. That's the only seams you have to meet. So you can see me doing it with my finger, but if you want to use a pin or a clip or something, that's it really. And then you just keep joining one row to the next. I did it in 2 lots of 3, so then I was joining the 2 big halves, but you do it whichever way you like. So how quick was it all? I finished this quilt top in 2 evenings, and they're not full evenings because I've got 2 young kids, so there was bedtimes, there was kids waking up in the middle of the evening, all that kind of stuff. And I also, with part of those 2 evenings and then the following evening, managed to use what I had left over with my scraps to make that bonus quilt top I told you about as well. So I think this one was pretty quick. So here it is, the finished quilt top. Obviously not the finished quilt yet because it's not quilted. It's still not exactly my colors, but I'm happy with how it turned out, and I'm happy with how quickly it came together. But as I said, I did get a little bit sidetracked with my scraps because of the way I didn't cut the way I told you to. So I will tell you about my sort of bonus second quilt top just now.
Okay, so obviously I set out to make this like a very minimal waist, very minimal cutting quilt, but the way I did it, where I didn't cut out my strips exactly the right length, and I also didn't even start with the fat quarters that I'm suggesting you start with, I did end up with a pile of blue scraps primarily. There was a tiny bit of the gray, but almost nothing of the jelly roll strips. It was the yardage, the blue, the aqua light blue color. So you know what I'm like. If you've been here before, I like crumb quilting, I like improv sewing. So I just used those kind of techniques. Started out making, you know, a sort of no measure, don't worry about it version of the same block we've been making for the Stashbuster, so like a quarter log cabin. But when I ran out of pieces like that, I just made basically improv blocks, crumb blocks, I don't know what you even call it. Just sewing stuff together and making up my big jigsaw of the aqua blue. And that got to a size, it was probably big enough for like a little toddler kid's bed, but I wanted to make it a bit bigger. So me being me, what did I do? I added denim, because why not? So I added a denim border, and that's it for now. It's I think it came up at like 60 by 70, so it's an okay size. I don't know what it's for, and it's not quilted yet usually. So if you've watched the channel before, you might have noticed I don't really say it, but I kind of have a semi informal policy. It's not a policy, it's just a thing I do, where I like to have my quilts quilted before I put the video out. I just think they look better, and I don't know, it's just a thing. And also if it's not in a video and I just leave it, am I going to quilt it, or is it just going to sit here realistically, right? So anyways, so I now have two quilt tops, right? The Stashbuster one and this bonus extra one, which I haven't quilted. So in order to make me quilt them, could you guys give me suggestions in the comments of which one of these? Well, I could maybe do both, because I've got two. Anyway, I've got two ideas. So for the Stashbuster quilt, I either want to go on the Moxie and do like all sorts of different patterns in the different big spaces that the blue fabric made, or try the faux hand stitching thing that you can do on the machine. I know that's on my faff, where I think you use like monofilament thread on the top. Anyway, I haven't done it before, so I could try that, see if I can make it look like it's hand stitched. Or I have another idea for something I've been wanting to try on a domestic, which I also haven't done. So let me know in the comments if any of those are something you want to see, and I will do them on one or the other of the quilt top. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you like scrappy videos like this and you haven't subscribed already, please do, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought, and let me know how you think I should quilt those quilt tops. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.